Today on episode 165 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we speak to veterans Mike Sarraille and George Randle, and they're going to teach you how you can hit peak performance by winning the talent war. That's right, folks. It's all about getting the best people today. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. It is Scott McCarthy, your Chief Leadership Officer, and I hope you're ready for this, folks, because we are in for a doozy of a podcast. That's right. I got CEO of Echelon Front Overwatch, Mike Sarraille, former U.S. Navy SEAL, and George Randle, who's a strategic advisor to Overwatch and a former U.S. Army officer. And they're going to be talking about their book, The Talent War, which I recommend to you right now. Honestly, you know I don't do this often. Hit pause and go buy a copy because it is fan-freaking-tastic. One of the best books I've ever read in this job and just in general. Just amazing cover to cover. And everyone who I've recommended that book to has said the exact same thing. This episode is jam-packed with information for you. I am not going to drag out this introduction too long because you're going to want to get to the goods. But quickly, I will let you know who these guys are. So again, Mike Sarraille, he's the CEO of Echelon Front Overwatch, which is an executive search and talent advisory firm, and he's a leadership consultant within Echelon Front. If you don't know Echelon Front, that is Jocko Willink and Leif Babin's company. So they work for basically a spinoff of Echelon Front. George Randle is the strategic advisor, as well as he is the vice president of global talent acquisition at ForcePoint. So both of these guys are heavily into the space of talent acquisition. And you're probably wondering what the heck do two former military folks have to do with talent acquisition? Guess what? It's literally the first question I asked, so I'm going to save the answer for the show. Before I hit play on the interview, I do have one disclaimer. Right as we started recording, I accidentally hit the connector of my microphone with a water bottle. So you're going to hear me not so well. I didn't clue in when Mike said that he was having a hard time hearing me, what was going on. And ultimately, my sound isn't the greatest. That's the bad news. The good news is I actually don't talk a whole lot in this episode because, one, I have two guests on this show, and two, George can talk a lot, but he gets some amazing nuggets dropped here. So, without further ado, that is it. Why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation all about how you can win the talent war. Go live. Gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mike and George. It's so great to have both of you here tonight.
Dude, Scott, thank you for having us.
Appreciate it very much.
So, first question out of the gate. I got two former Special Forces guys. How the heck do
No,
you?
just one. Just
Ah,
one. Just
sorry,
one.
sorry.
Nah. No, I'm your Mark 1 Mod 0 Army Nug.
He served his country. It doesn't matter the capacity you serve. If you serve, trust me, the military's going to get their pound of flesh, regardless of.
That's true. That's true.
All right, so one special forces guy, one army guy. You got a currently serving army dude in the middle between you two. So it's going to be an interesting talk tonight. What I'm interested to know is how do two you guys end up writing a book, which is generally revolving around human resources and talent acquisition in that realm.
It's a colorful story. I'm going to let Mike lead out on that one.
So, state guys, I'm sorry, I must have a shortage here or disruption in service. State the question again.
So, how did two military guys end up writing a book about basically human resources and talent acquisition?
So, again, you're broken up a little bit. I got the gist of the question. So, George served back in the Civil War. I'm sorry, the 80s, 90s. Interesting enough, and he can tell you his background. He actually was stationed in Berlin during the Cold War. So you talk about a piece of history. But George's route is a lot like mine in that we were two, at first glance, unexceptional young 18-year-olds. And though we didn't believe that, he enlisted in the Army in the 80s. I enlisted in the Marine Corps in the late 90s. We followed a similar route in that we were both enlisted and then became officers. We call that a Mustang in the Navy and the Marine Corps. Do you guys call them Mustangs in the Army?
Sometimes we do. Those in the know. Those in the know.
Yeah. So both Mustangs. And then George entered the private sector a few years before I did and chose off his path. And I'm speaking for George to eventually he found his way to human resources because he knew how to find or identify and find talent. He also knew how to develop people, the leadership development part. So when you look at the book, it says The Talent War, how special operations and great organizations win on talent. He brought the private sector experience, even though he served in the military. I brought the special operations experience. And so he reached out to me on LinkedIn. Again, the power of LinkedIn. I've never seen a more powerful tool in terms of social networking, even more so than, again, Instagram and Facebook really aren't our main areas of hunting. But he reached out because he knew I was with Echelon Front, Jocko Willink's company. And he also saw that I was in Austin. He saw that I was trying to place veterans, and he invited me to a breakfast. And let's just say the rest was history. We hit it off, kept on talking. A friendship ensued, and then long enough, a brotherhood ensued. Actually, I asked him to be the pastor for my wife and I's wedding, in which he had the crowd in stitches, laughing on the ground at my expense.
Highest pressure job I've ever had to include the military, to be an Army guy standing in front of Navy SEALs trying to conduct a ceremony.
It knocked it out of the park. And so we have the same passions. One, we love our country. We believe in the military as the world's greatest leadership development platform. We believe in the power of free enterprise, and we believe in, or we're passionate about, how do you create these elite winning teams? And it's not as easy as it sounds. And so as we started to venture down the business path together, one night, I picked up the phone because I had an idea. I occasionally get like one good idea every few months. And I'm like, hey, George, we need to write a book. And using special operations as like the business case example for an organization that is just, the business world's fascinated with special operations and how they build these teams and how they operate. And he agreed. And then we started the process of identifying how to go through the process of writing a book, which neither of us knew, and is a daunting task, almost like starting a business. And a year and a half later, even though we thought this thing was never going to go, probably about a few months in, we eventually published the book.
That's awesome. Love the story. And George, we'll have a conversation about the Civil War another time when I'm doing a history paper again.
Yeah, I was really grateful to go from horses to the Jeep and eventually see the initial rollout of the Humvee. So, I've gotten to see a lot in my time. I was very grateful for that because I didn't like horses, to be honest with you.
So let's dive into the meat
Yeah.
and potatoes, the bolts, the nuts and bolts of what you guys talked about in the talent war. And one of the interesting things that I found was right out of the gate and how you really explained how companies out there are actually losing the war before they even start entering it and how they're going after the wrong candidates in the first place. So,
Yeah.
one, can you explain for the audience out there why companies are going after the wrong people? And then I guess we'll dive into how they can go about actually going after the right people.
Well, I guess, one of the things I would say, it's not that they're going after the wrong people. It's just they don't know what the hell they're going after in the first place. They don't have a talent mindset. And that's the thing. And the genius around special operations is that nobody comes to the table with special operations experience. So they have to become experts in potential-based hiring. And companies don't look at it that way. It's butts and seats. It's I've got headcount, I've got budget. Hey, I need, two hands are two extra hands are better than the two hands that I have. There's all kinds of reasons, but they don't know what they're looking for. And Mike and I borrow a lot of phrases from one another. And I really never wanted to say this about my profession, but I think Mike really nailed it when he said, the default position for a lot of people hiring is lazy. And it's so correct. It's so on point that people default to objective requirements. And they think, okay, if this person has 4 years of experience, or they have 5 years in this, or they came from our competitor, and the default position is to just go to the market. I need a head count. Here's a list of objective requirements, and this is what I'm going to go after. They don't start with what does success look like, and special operations gets that better than anybody else because they know the attributes define success.
All right, so let's, you can't leave me hanging there. So what are those attributes that, as probably Mike, for you to answer, is what are those attributes that special operations, recruiters and the selection process and all that, what are they looking for? And then the follow on is, how can we bring that to companies, civilian organizations out there for those executives who are watching this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you say the special operations recruiters, the people out there actually finding the young men and women are actually defaulting to objective measures. Like, is their physical training score this? Is their, intellect, I'm forgetting what component of the ASVAB that is, what's their GT, right? GT score.
Yep.
Are they medically qualified? Ultimately, when they're selected based off meeting those objective requirements, and they're high bars, they go to special operations training, and those are the instructors that actually go through the subjective form of the assessment of looking for specific attributes and trying to evaluate, does this man or woman have the character to operate within one of the, let's just describe it as one of the most chaotic environments you can place any human. That's the environment that special operations operate in. Guess what? That's no different than the business world. It is a cutthroat environment. It is hyper competitive, and it moves at the speed of light. And if you can't do that, if you can't compete, if you can't move quickly, your business is going to go away very quickly. But looking at the attributes, this one, it became a debate between myself and George, and then we had a contributor named Dr. Josh Cotton. Each of the special operations communities, the Special Forces, Army Special Forces, MARSOC, SEALs, Rangers, Air Force Special Operations had all come up with their own list of attributes. And the lists are different, but as you look at them, they're really not that far off from each other. And so we went through all these attributes, and then we looked at the business world and what, the attributes that make a highly successful business operator, and regardless of domain. And really, they're the same attributes. And we came up with a core list of 9. And a few of them are like drive. You can't create drive where drive does not exist. Now, drive is a big thing. People that usually come to special operations are driven, or so they think. And then once they are pushed to their mental and physical limits, that's when true character emerges. And that's when you determine if the person has drive, if they're willing to drive through anything to make it onto that team. Now, special operations training is, to the normal human eye, it seems sadistic. It's not intended to be that whatsoever. We're not there to put the kids through torture, to make them cold until they're at the precipice of hypothermia, or putting their bodies through hell. Again, we push them to their mental and physical limits in order to identify their true character. Drive, resiliency, emotional intelligence is a good one. As we say, integrity is a no-go criteria. What we mean is you either have integrity or you don't. And if there's any indications that you lack integrity, you're gone, because you are going to be entrusted with lives. And as you know, anything that the special operations community does anywhere in the world can make front page news in a matter of hours, if not minutes. So those list of 9, I think, George, I'd say we're pretty proud of them, because I think we went from like 35, and it was a tough discussion to get it down to 9.
Yeah, it was brutal. And the thing about these attributes is that each one of the special operations units, as Mike mentioned, MARSOC Raiders, whether it's the Green Berets, with Navy SEALs, Air Force PJs, whatever, they all found their particular flavor of the things that they were looking for. And what executives could learn, frankly, what they just don't do when they go to hiring, is to say, what are those factors for our department, our role, that define success? And so Mike and I were looking for those commonalities. And we think if you look at those, because, frankly, if you're going to go hire a developer and they've got 2 years of C++, does 4 years make them twice as good? No. But does resiliency, when their program fails, or when they get a bug in that program, or when they have a setback, or when you have a salesperson, where does resiliency fit in when that deal falls through at the last second because the company doesn't have budget? So we were looking at all of those things that would help companies say, these are the things that matter towards success. These are predictive factors. Experience is not necessarily predictive. And special operations knows that. In the middle of the most chaotic environments that Mike was talking about, those hard skills to grade, that's when those character attributes come through. And look at COVID. COVID's like the best example. Who was prepared for that? But the people that had the resiliency, that had the drive, that had the curiosity, the effective intelligence, that's had all those attributes, it's like no factor. Hey, man, let's move on.
No, that's super interesting, and I like the way that you guys went with that. Now, Mike, I got an idea of what you were talking about when you were talking about selection and all that stuff. I did go through Special Forces selection back in 2009 for the supporter role for one of the units here in Canada. And, even in supporter role, it's not fun. But by the end of that week, you start second questioning some things. You're like, man, might as good,
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So I guess my question is, I love where you guys go with looking for these attributes and stuff, but obviously Bell or HP or Google can't be putting people through Hell Week. They can't be doing all these different types of psych tests and interview after interview after interview with different types of specialists and stuff like that. So how do they go and leverage this type of mentality when they're out there looking for their people, looking for the right people, those talented ones that have those attributes that are really going to, especially the one with like grit, where they're going to get through these hard times and bring their team with them. So how do they go about actually looking for that when they can't, quote unquote, torture their people to see who's got it?
We were very careful to make sure that was in the book. We said, hey, Cap, out of your notice warning, don't take your potential candidates, job candidates, down to Lake Superior during the winter and make them get in the water.
Nice 2 degrees Celsius water. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially, Canada, you'd have people, as we say, hyping out real quick. So, people that are open-minded can understand this. People that are closed-minded to the book, they can't see it. What we're saying is special operations, which is over half a century old, their assessment and selection process, their hiring process continues to evolve. It's taken them 50 years to become one of the best organizations at hiring in the world. I without a doubt, they are the best organization in hiring because they basically run a 2-year behavioral interview process. You can't hide during that. Your true character is going to come out. They're going to know what you're made of. So they had to design that process over a series of years, and they're still evolving it. And they found out what works for them. But they, as George said earlier, they identified what a good operator, whether in the business world or special operations, what a good talent profile looks like. This is what we know. These are the attributes required in order to be successful in this role. And as you become good, you have to do it for every role and function within your organization. As you said, even special operations support goes through an assessment and selection process. And they're being evaluated on some of the same attributes as well as other attributes. If they're going to be in logistics, they want to see that they're very detail oriented. So they're looking for specific things. So for businesses, they need to create a multivariate process for hiring, and I'll let George go through that. It's just something that has several gates, and they need to continue to evolve that process until they start to make sure that every hire is a home run, and you're never going to achieve that, but you want to get close. That's the goal. Perfection is always the goal. We accept nothing less than excellence. And also your attrition starts to decline as well. So you're evolving that process. And even when you get numbers that you're happy with, you continue to evolve it so that your competition can never catch up. George, you want to talk about the multivariate process?
Yeah. There's 3 things. And we had this great contributor named Brian Decker. And he was talking about, and this is what, I don't think there's a listener out there that's been to an interview that didn't go from one interviewer to the second, to the third, to the fourth, and they get asked all the same questions. It was just like one long continuous interview with a different face. And it drives me absolutely crazy. But one of the things that Brian Decker talked about is that once you meet a minimum gate for the experience, there's the experiential gate. I mean, we don't want to hire an intern for a CEO. We're not going to hire somebody with an underwater basket weaving degree to be a computer programmer, obviously so. So there's an experiential gate, but once you meet the minimum requirements, that gate closes. Then second, there might be some kind of behavioral assessment test. So there's any number of them out there. And if you want to know which ones are the best, call us. We'll walk you through it. But the third thing is designing an interview process that looks at the attributes that you have predefined as success and required for success in this role. And you've designed questions to elicit the how behind their accomplishments, their failures, and those attributes. And above all else, believe it or not, like we said, we don't take somebody down to Lake Superior, to Lake Michigan, because that's the one I've been in, and get them cold and sandy and all of that. But you can create an awful lot of pressure in an interview by asking the how behind questions. So you have the experiential gate, you can use some kind of assessment tool, but then you have the interview process, and that interview process has to be very standardized. So you're comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges against the success profile. What usually happens is that people walk into that process not defining success and grabbing people, I hate to say off the street, but that's really it, is saying, hey, who's available to interview to add this person to our team? Instead of having A players who know what A players look like, interview for that across the standardized assessment.
I want to highlight what Brian Decker found, especially with intelligence, will strike a lot of people, I think, within the business world.
Oh, yeah.
It actually sort of took, I had to step back and process what Brian was saying. So, again, the GT score in the ASVAB is what evaluates basic overall intelligence for soldiers trying to get into the military. And you have to have you have to hit a specific gate in order to qualify to even try out for special operations. But what they found is that increasing scores of intelligence don't equate to superior performance. So again, they looked at the talent profile and said, what is necessary? And they identified that gate. And once somebody meets it, it's closed. It's no longer a factor. I've met a lot of intelligent people, and there's a lot of organizations that go after simply horsepower, intellectual horsepower. I get it. Intellectual horsepower is required in the special operations community. but a lot of organizations fish out of Ivy League schools for these highly intelligent people. I've met a lot of highly intelligent people that are what I call wicked smart, that are absolutely low in character or lack the ability to deal with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Now, it's a phrase, they talk about rich people. I've met a lot of rich people that are rich in the bank, but poor in character. And I will say this, Scott, you're probably very selective of who you let into your personal circle, because that very much identifies your brand as well. Why would you be any different with the people that you let into your company? Mm-hmm. This is a process you have to take very seriously. And I don't care if I work for Walmart. If I'm in charge of Walmart hiring, I'm going to hire people that I know that are going to promote and elevate that brand. Not the other way around. And so this is why companies have to take this very seriously, and they don't.
No, I definitely hear you guys. And one thing interesting, you were talking basically about the hiring process, George, and what came to my mind was, what does that look like when they're going through these gates? A lot of people out there basically like, okay, I show up and it's, the HR rep and then some random guy and then maybe who could be my supervisor or just some other person, who should be the ones that are there through and through, start to finish this process? Because I get a feel in my gut, it's probably not what you guys would recommend.
Well, and I'm going to steal your example, Mike, because Mike, he spitting fire and ticked off that he was brought into the assessment and selection process and pulled off the line where he loves to be, where he lives to be. And the reason that they did that is because A players like Mike recognize in others A player attributes. And the challenge is that those teams that you pull together, they're generally members of that team. They're like, okay, let me pull who's available. Instead of looking at the most successful people, it doesn't have to be the most successful people in that department. It has to be A players from multiple departments. You want your absolute superstars, the people that are succeeding across all departments, to be in that interview process. Just because you're interviewing an engineer doesn't mean a sales A player shouldn't be interviewing them. You're interviewing a sales person, an A player from engineering, an A player from finance, an A player from human resources. It's about A players selecting A players. B players are going to select B players. And, I kind of joke, having been in talent acquisition, C players will select whatever the cat drug in. You don't know what you're going to get. It's important. And that's one of the reasons, Mike was brought into selection assessment. That's one of the big things he brought to the book, is that Mike knows what it takes to succeed in the most brutal environment, the most chaotic environment ever of combat, the most difficult one you're ever going to face on the planet. That's the person you need selecting your talent. And if you don't have that, what you get is basically run of the mill, for lack of a better term.
It's Mike, I'm gonna focus in on you and that story for a second. So here at the podcast, I focus on what I call the 3 domains: leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. So we're predominantly in the organization space with a bit of a team flavor to it too. But I want to talk about yourself for a second, because what George talked about, that could have been like a shot to your ego. So one, how did you feel when you got pulled off the line doing what you love, to be pulled into doing this, selection process? And 2, how did you as a leader get over that and see the actual value that it was bringing to your organization at that time?
I had a complete allergic reaction. And that allergic reaction, if we want to trace the source, was 100% unequivocally, without a doubt, my ego. That was totally my ego. And the fact that, on paper, 3 other people were selected to take platoons to go back to combat, who I had more combat experience than, and I had outperformed in the SEAL teams. And I couldn't deal with that well. And basically, one, I wasn't given an option. Um, that was where I was going, much like a company said, hey, we're going to shift you over here and we need you to take charge of this situation and lead. But I did have a great leader that pulled me aside and explained the why behind it. I don't think after he explained it, I don't think it helped much back then, but now I understand. And that's just the maturation of leadership and becoming older and having the ability to recognize things. I was very front sight focused on war at the time. And he said, hey, listen, no one's doubting that you're competent on the battlefield. We're not saying that whatsoever. In fact, I remember you should actually take this as a compliment, that you're going to go have an exponential effect on the community, the SEAL community, by training the next generation of officers. He's like, if you can create, 10 more competent leaders who go on to create 5 more competent leaders, and then those 5 go on to create 5 more, then that's an exponential effect. And again, it took me a while to comprehend that, like years after I was in that billet. But when I was training these young ensigns, as well as there were some Air Force Special Operations soldiers that they sent, officers, their motivation just completely consumed me. They were like sponges, and I loved the billet. Of all my tours in the military, that was one of the most rewarding, because, yeah, that's great. Anyone going to a battlefield that has some level of capacity and lead troops to close with and destroy the enemy. That it's going to happen one way or the other. But for a leader to leave an impact on the next generation is something that's not always achieved. So I appreciate that leader sitting me down and trying to explain it at the time. I'd like to go back and tell him that it took about 10 years for it to sink in, but I totally see what
Scott, you know what you think about, seriously, if I'm an outsider and I'm thinking in special operations in the U.S. military, the mission that they're given, who do I want selecting and training those leaders? I want somebody like Mike, because individuals don't win, teams win. And it's one of the things that we talk about in this book. And it is a hard concept to get across, but it's a critical concept. And I give Mike a ton of credit, because this was a part he hammered home in the book, which is you've got to have the discipline. You have got to have the foresight to say, I need to pull my best people off to select what's going to drive this company forward. So if I'm sitting here and I'm a civilian and I'm thinking, okay, who do I want to lead our special operations? Who do I want to lead our soldiers, our airmen, our Marines, our sailors? I'm thinking, God, I better have a Mike. But companies don't think that way. And that's one of the things that we were trying to change with this book, was that mindset of how do you pull those people that are absolute rock stars in their field and get that next generation that's going to take your company in innovation, in sales, in customer service, everything that you're doing forward. It seems like a very difficult concept, and Mike spells out it was even very difficult for him, but it absolutely has an exponential effect, exactly like he said.
That really goes into the talent management piece, as well as sort of benefits and comp. How do you incentivize behaviors to pull in just your sales all-star out to go select the next 10 sales reps? Is you've got to incentivize them to really put the heart into that effort and understand why it's impactful on the organization.
So with that, what are some of the best incentives out there? Because the sales guy, no doubt, would have a hard time accepting that role, because often sales guys are commission based, right? I'm out there crushing sales. I'm making coin like bank, hand over fist. You take me off and I got to go.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. They're totally coin operated. I absolutely get that. And, look, it's not a brain surgeon that requires you to sit down and say, how do we design a compensation program that incentivizes your top sales guy to come off the line for 6 months in a rotation? And think about it. Look, even your best salesperson for your major companies, if you really look at the bottom line, if you look at the P&L, it's a rounding error. But what you need to be thinking about, if you're that COO or that CEO, is you pull that sales guy off and they create 5 of your $1 million sales winners, you've gone from one guy doing 1 million to 5 million. We could give you all kinds of logical reasons, but if you want to get down to a revenue number, look at it. This is what we said, basically. You take Mike and you put him in front of ensigns. You're creating 10, 20, 30 very combat effective leaders. You take 1 or 2 salespeople, you're making 5, 10, 15 more effective salespeople driving your revenue. And if you can't figure out the incentive is how to compensate that person, seriously, give me a call. I'll do it for you. Frankly, it's not that hard. I don't mean to be so crass, but it's truly not that hard.
So even a top salesperson who's with an organization, if they're driven by money, if that's their sole focus, they're going to jump ship in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
Somebody dangles a more lucrative compensation package in front of them. So, one, in the long run, that person might have brought short-term success to the organization, but if they just up and leave you, that causes ripples and impacts. I'd rather select somebody who's slightly less capable as a salesperson, but is high in, again, integrity, high in loyalty. Somebody who's a team player. How many salespeople, and I know we are just picking on salespeople today, but you're like, yeah, hey, that person's the top salesperson for this organization, but they're a real a-hole.
Okay, my buddy Drew's watching this, is in sales, so we can keep going.
Okay. I love sales. Hey, what is it? Something like over 80% of all CEOs came from a sales background.
Yep.
It's the brass tacks. Sales are like the SEALs of any organization. They're leading from the front. But ultimately, compensation for regardless of role. So let's get away from sales. It could be a computer engineer. It could be a marketing rep. It could be a human resources person. Your compensation and benefits package has to be in the ballpark. It's got to be competitive within the industry. Now let's look past that. Ultimately, what do people want? They want to be part of a winning team. And a winning team that does it right. Hey, you can still win, but if you do it unethically, you're going to still have a toxic organization. They want a winning organization with great leadership. You cannot substitute great leadership. My first job out of the military was a great compensation package, but the leadership was awful, and I couldn't get out of there soon enough. And I actually took a major risk to remove that from that environment. So they want a winning organization. They want great leadership. They want ownership over their lives. Yeah. And you want them to take ownership by giving them ownership. You want them to take ownership of their roles and responsibilities at their level, wherever it is within the organization. They also want autonomy over their lives. And lastly, they want growth opportunities. They want to understand what's the trajectory if I work hard. What is the trajectory for not only me, but ultimately my family?
So what I'm hearing from you, if we have the A players anyway, and even if they are a salesperson, Drew, and you walk in and you go, hey, I need you to come on, off the call line and go in the recruiting hunt and hunt down, 5, 10, whatever. If they're that A type, they're going to be like, hell yeah, let's go. Because they already have that mentality anyway, right? They're already in that headspace. They already recognize the benefit that's going to bring to their organization. And if they can go ahead and fill their team with A types, A players that are going to go ahead and crush their sales, and they're the leader or manager, whatever, of that sales team, that's just elevating the whole crew with them.
Yeah, it comes down to, Mike and I talked about, and it was, I think, the very front end of the book is having that talent mindset. The only true competitive advantage that you can hope to achieve and maintain is your people. And so exactly what you talked about was having that mindset, that A player that understands that people make the difference. And that's everything. And if you have the right mindset, you can accomplish anything.
A players, go back to your point, A players understand when they're looking for people to join their team, they understand one quote. And actually, I should say this one Bible verse. And don't think I'm an overly religious person. I'm a bad Roman Catholic, and I haven't been to church in a while. I'll probably get a call from my mom here in a second. But Proverbs 27:17. Iron sharpens iron, so as one man sharpens another. when we're looking at our team, EF Overwatch, even though we may be hiring a young college graduate who's 21 or 22, George and I are asking ourselves, as well as Carly and Tom Lokar, is this person capable of giving me a run for my money? Are they going to elevate me? Or even if it's not through industry knowledge, is it because they bring so much energy to the team that it's going to want to make me drive?
Yep.
So I don't care if this person ends up overtaking me 5 years down the line, because that means I'm going to still own the company, and they're taking it to a new level. I'll just step out of the way. That's fine, and I'll still be part of a winning team. I'll just be from a following position, not a leading position.
Awesome. Love it. So going to slowly wind down here, but I do got another, basically theme, because I'm sure between two of you guys, you'll take this for at least 10 to 12 minutes. So let's say I'm the exec that's out there listening to this show right now, and they're like, damn, you know what? We are hiring just for skill. We haven't been looking at talent. We haven't been looking at these attributes, and you know what? These guys are on to something, because newsflash, you guys actually are on to something, because I've read that book cover to cover and recommend it highly. So what's the path now? How does a leader, an executive, a business owner go and suddenly go from doing hiring in a skills-oriented fashion to now having to flip the switch and going, you know what, let's go in this talent fashion that you two are recommending?
Patience. It's going to require a lot of patience and resiliency. George, if I'm wrong there.
No, you're right.
Hey, Rome wasn't built over one night. This takes time. This takes time to change. You're basically going through a culture change. That's what you're doing when you commit to hiring for character and training for skill. You're very much going through an organizational cultural shift. Now, one, it starts with having the conversation of, again, the talent profiles for a position. I wouldn't even engage in hiring, truthfully, if George and I don't understand the leadership foundation and the cultural foundation of our organization. If you haven't defined that first, then that's where you may want to start. A lot of people just choose some flowery words, throw them up on the wall, and say that's our company core values. But are they? Are you, as a leader within your organization, exhibiting those behaviors? And leadership is not a position. Leadership is ultimately a set of behaviors, and whether you execute those behaviors or not. Are we performing those behaviors on a day-to-day basis? What really matters? And then reverse engineering it from there.
And for me, I would be remiss, and I will be thrown in the surf and get cold, wet, and sandy if I don't bring this up. First thing, that leader, that CEO, that executive is the mindset switch. Yeah. You treat your human capital with the same focus, rigor, and discipline as you do your financial capital. Full stop. You do that, that's where it starts. That's where you get into looking at what does success look like. And I won't go into the times we've all suffered death by PowerPoint and all of that. But when you start looking at talent as your true competitive advantage, and that's your mindset, that's the place to start. And from there, you can work and iterate your way to being just dominating in your space.
But George, you mind if we reverse?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because ultimately, George and I talked about this thing called the talent mindset.
Yeah.
The foundational belief that people, not systems, not processes, that people are the most strategic competitive advantage you can ever hope to achieve.
Yep.
Special operations understands this. That is why, that's the second microphone drop. This is why special operations take so long to evaluate their people. That's why, because they want to make sure that every hire has the highest probability of being a contributing member that's going to move that organization forward. Now, if you look at special operations and everything that's written, their cultural foundation, their 5 axioms, it all revolves around people. People are the most important asset. People over hardware. Talent cannot be created in the wake of an emergency. Everything revolves around people. Now, there's some good organizations that do that are close to that level of operating in the business world. Netflix. Foundationally, you look at the Netflix culture deck. I love to read that thing, I think, once about a month. It helps orientate me. They believe it, and they're trying to live it, and they're a massive organization, but they want rock stars, as it says in the culture deck, rock stars in every position. And if they identify someone who's not a rock star, regardless of the level of the organization, they're going to get that person out, and they're going to do it in a very professional manner, because actually they're setting that person up for success to go find an organization where they will thrive. So that talent mindset is powerful. Beyond that foundational thing I discussed about people are the greatest strategic competitive advantage you can ever hope to achieve, George just said it. For all CEOs listening to this, or all leaders, and George, I'll let you say the quote again. You can look in the mirror and say this with being 100% candid with yourself. Then good, you're heading in the right direction. But if you can honestly look in the mirror and be like, yeah, we're not there, then you've got a talent problem. You need to start working on it. George, the quote one more time. I want the listeners to hear this.
You have to treat your financial capital with the same rigor, discipline, and focus as you do your financial capital.
You're human. You have to treat your human capital.
Human capital, my apologies.
Yeah. So
it's all good, George. It's all good.
Yeah, when you're so serious, when you're as serious about your people as you are your capital, your financial capital, then you truly believe in this talent mindset.
Yeah, as 3 military guys here, we all know how important our people are, right? They are everything, and especially as leaders, they're the reason why we lead. Without our people, we're not leaders, and you want to be leading the best because it makes your life so much easier. So I love the whole ideology behind the book. I loved it from cover to cover, gents. It was absolutely amazing to go through. One of the top ones I've read thus far from doing this gig, and getting to talk to guys like yourselves just makes this so much fun and rewarding, because now I get to not only get a front row seat to an education in advanced leadership, but I get to make connections with yourselves, but most importantly help, just like we talked about, that A person, that A player. Now I'm helping develop more leaders out there. So thank you for your role in this. Before we wind down, I got a couple last questions for you both. One I asked all the guests here moving forward leadership, and that is, according to you, Mike Sarraille and George Randle, what makes a great leader? You can fight over who goes first.
It's Mike. I actually, one of the great things, and I know he's going to answer this question. One of the privileges of working with Mike is that you're always learning something. So letting him go first, I'm always learning. It's a great thing about the two of us working together is it's just, we're trying to get better all the time. So Mike, you get first, because I'm always anxious to hear.
And hey, that this is a two-way street. George and I, we have our disagreements. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't want people thinking like, oh, those guys just jive all the time. No. There are times where I zig and he decides to zig as well. And I'm like, what the hell, man? You were supposed to zag. Trust me. But we work it out because we both have the same intent of, we want this organization, EF Overwatch, to be absolutely powerful. We want to disrupt, or I should say, find what real human resources looks like. So here's how I'll define the ultimate level of leadership. And I am, in many ways, stealing this from John Maxwell. You've become a great leader when people follow you for who you are and what you represent. And that is hard to achieve. And that requires a high degree of selflessness, putting the team above you. Now, there's a lot of great leaders out there. People that work for them will move heaven and earth to accomplish whatever goals. But they're out of balance in other areas of life, maybe because they were so fixated on their team and their business that their family life degraded. So the leadership, no one has this figured out. Leadership is a vague art that requires constant reassessment, and it changes as you change in different phases of your life. So if we talk about leadership, George and I are in the pursuit of constant knowledge regarding leadership and how to execute it. And we fall short every day. And we'll fall short every single day, but we'll learn and we'll get better until George is in the grave, which is probably about 5 years from now. And then I'll
And for me, it was a lesson I didn't learn early enough in my military career, and it came a little bit later. And it's reinforced that Mike and I and this team that we built at EF Overwatch working together is humility. And Mike has a phrase, and I've plagiarized it as much as I possibly can and will continue to, which is the best idea wins. Is that in the pursuit of us getting better about leadership, how we wrote the book, how we do things here at EF Overwatch, how we do things, is that it's about success. And if you're a leader, that humility to accept the input and a better idea, or to have somebody shoot holes in your idea to make it stronger and better, is absolutely one of those things at leadership that I really wish I had learned a lot earlier, but am so grateful that I have at this point in my career.
Love it both, gents. Love it both. Wouldn't expect nothing but amazing and rockstar answers from you both. Final thing is, where can people find you? How can they follow you? Shameless plugs all around. It's all about you guys right now. Have at it.
The book can be found, The Talent War, How Special Operations and Organizations Win on Talent, anywhere books are sold. I know that usually means for most people to go to Amazon and order with 1-day service. So you can find the book on Amazon. In fact, I think it hit bestseller in over 10 Amazon categories. For George and I, this is what we do. Some companies may be asking where to start. Call us. I mean, this is part of our talent advisory through EF Overwatch. We also do executive search. We're in the space that we wrote a book about, day to day in the trenches fighting it. But to watch George, Tom Lokar, and Carly Walden step into a company who has the ability to say, hey, we need help, and work with them over the course of a few weeks to create a world-class talent acquisition program and then stay in touch with them. There is nothing more rewarding for us than that. And you can find us at EF Overwatch is the name of the company, www.efoverwatch.com. George?
And on LinkedIn, please connect with Mike and I. We, one of the things that we talked about at our first breakfast is we both nerd out on talent. So if you're into talent, by all means, connect with us on LinkedIn. We're happy to make those connections and spread the good word.
Awesome. For the listeners, always it's super easy. They're in the show notes. Go to movingforwardleadership.com/165. Links are in the show notes. Gentlemen, this has been amazing. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed reading the book. And most importantly, I enjoyed getting a few digs at my buddy Drew, who's watching, who's in this space. So, but seriously, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know you're too busy, gentlemen. So thanks for coming out.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend, win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.